Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Kathleen Kennedy has stepped down as the president of Lucasfilm, and now Dave Filoni is stepping up to fill in the creative director lead position for the Star Wars IP. And while I'm a little hesitant about Filoni's work, especially when it comes to the live action stuff, I really can't think of anyone better to handle taking care of the animated side of the franchise. After the original trilogy and prequel trilogy came out, the Clone Wars animated TV series is probably the third most important thing to come out for Star Wars. If you take out some of the books and some of the video games, that is. Even if Tartakovsky's earlier Clone Wars animated series was epic and had a very unique visual style, it was Dave Filoni who really fully invested himself into the lore. And I think the sheer amount of content from the Clone Wars animated TV series fully rehabilitated the prequel trilogy's reputation and gave weight and meaning to the characters and actions in the movies. Obviously, most stories don't get a second chance like Star Wars did, but as a result, the Clone Wars TV show became one of the most beloved series for my generation. And while we love covering the live action stuff, especially Andor on this channel, much of this channel's early success is due to the Clone Wars animated TV series. I mean, we cover the crap out of that show. And if we take a look at the evolution of Dave Filoni since those earlier Clone Wars days with the low polygon count animation and terrible lighting, his improvement has been drastic. I mean, he's worked very closely with George Lucas to develop characters like Ahsoka Tano, all of the individual clone troopers. He's also been a huge player in how Asajj Ventress' story has been developed. And he's done a phenomenal job at creating believable and impactful character arcs for all of these characters he was trusted with. I mean, we're still waiting for a show just about the clone troopers, right? I personally would love a live-action war drama. I know it's not Disney or Dave Filoni's cup of tea, but, I'm going to keep throwing that suggestion out there. Hopefully someone will listen. But those clones are criminally underused at this point. And from a live action production point of view, having a bunch of characters who have helmets on all the time means you don't have to pay big names, probably. And then if we take a look at the streaming environment today where, cost increase and mergers are kind of scaring everyone, I think having a low-budget show that drives a lot of views is a big win. And now with Dave Filoni in charge of the creative side of Disney, I think he's got a lot of work he wants to finish. And from what we've seen, the longer he has to develop a character, usually the better that character gets. Ahsoka Tano and Asajj Ventress, as we mentioned before, are two of Dave Filoni's finest pieces of work, and they both start off as extremely irritating and annoying characters, but after much growth and trauma, become some of the strongest characters of the era. And this isn't Dave Filoni just being a lore nerd and Star Wars fan. This is him being a legitimately good character writer, right? I mean, this is something that stands out. These two characters stand out in a franchise full of really good characters. But perhaps the most interesting character that Dave Filoni got to work with during the Clone Wars and also Rebels was Maul, the Sith assassin who barely had any dialogue in The Phantom Menace, who became, because of aesthetic reasons and just pure vibe, a fan favorite. Sort of like how Jango Fett went from being a background character to one of the most beloved and cosplayed characters in Star Wars as well. Well, Maul would become a lot more popular after the prequel ends, and a lot of that has to do with Dave Filoni and his animated content. It was actually George Lucas who saw the opportunity to bring Maul back and convinced Dave Filoni to bring him back in the Clone Wars, at which point Dave Filoni famously asked, "How does that work?" Filoni reportedly hated this idea of bringing back a clearly dead character, but I'm glad that he was wrong about this, because bringing Maul back has been excellent. And because Dave Filoni was charged with bringing Maul back to life, he also started diving deeper into the world of Dathomir, and he created or rediscovered this alternative style of Force usage through the Dathomiri witches and their magical ichor, which of course also plays a big role in Asajj Ventress' backstory and also in the Ahsoka series. See, everything is kind of connected. It's almost as if Filoni has like this larger expanding web that resembles a plan, which is nice for Star Wars to have for once. Now, I was never a huge fan of Maul's return. I never really liked the more fantasy elements of Dathomir and the magical ichor, recreating Maul's legs and I'm guessing also his pee-pee. But then stories like Dark Disciple and just how well written Maul and Asajj Ventress' storylines became kind of changed my mind about this. And so it's very fitting that after Kathleen Kennedy's departure, one of the first announcements that Disney makes as far as new content releasing soon is this: Star Wars Maul Shadow Lord. This is very much Dave Filoni's bread and butter. It's as obvious of a move as The Bad Batch was after the release of the 7th season of the Clone Wars. While the live action side of Star Wars is swinging big and either hitting or missing big, it's been nothing but consistent and logical choices on the animation side, and this is a good, steady, and sure step forward. And again, considering the changing media landscape and how the economic situation is in the world, that's what Disney really needs at this point. I think Bob Iger is really struggling, and I think the shareholders are realizing this entire IP spamming strategy he has been behind for the last decade is finally collapsing and failing. And for Star Wars fans, that kind of sucks. Before we had too much content, some kind of lower quality content, but now we're probably facing a period with very little content, and it all has to do with this one factor. Ultimately, Andor cost around $27 million per episode to create, and the Clone Wars TV series cost around $1 million per episode back in the day. And even if we adjust for inflation, we also need to take into account that making animation today is a lot cheaper because of advancements in computer technology and also production technology. I mean, I used to do rotoscoping as a legitimate side gig. I also did Steadicam operation, and I learned from those careers that you should never put too much skill into one specific profession because technology moves fast. And in this case, animated shows are just so much cheaper than live action. It doesn't even come close. And I think with new increases in semiconductor technology, compute power, and also all of these LLMs, it's only going to become easier. And now Disney is in this environment where it essentially is number 2 after Netflix in the streaming wars. But at the same time, it's not making enough money to cover its declining legacy TV revenue, which is not a good thing. And now they have to face even more pressure from its parks and services segment. First, because they got too greedy. They started charging too much money for people to go to their parks and cruise ships. And it seems like last year, they also saw a huge drop in traffic, partly because rich Canadians aren't coming to America anymore. Who would have known that, continuously threatening our neighbors with economic warfare and also actual warfare would do that to them? I'm sorry, Canadians. Please come back. Plus, you have a mega merger between Paramount and Warner Brothers looking more and more likely every day as Netflix faces huge regulatory pressure in the EU if it ends up with Warner Brothers. Both HBO and Netflix are huge across most of the world, but specifically concentrated in Europe. And in Europe, unlike in the United States, they have regulators and antitrust capabilities that we just don't have in the United States for some reason. So they don't allow companies to control huge portions of the market if they can help it. Unless it's Google. Google can do whatever it wants no matter where in the world. It's basically a country at this point. But either way, Disney is facing a lot of headwinds. Either a much more powerful Netflix with Warner Brothers now in its library, or a newer up-and-coming streaming rival in Paramount, which now is a contender if they have Warner Brothers. So Disney is kind of in like a wait-and-see mode, right? It needs new leadership, it needs a new business model, and it needs to see what its competitors look like in the next 5 years, because we just really don't know. Big seismic things are happening in content, and that means Disney is going to just not do anything drastic financially. What does that equate to? I don't know. Most likely less stuff like Andor and The Acolyte, just less live action movies, and hopefully the stuff we do get to see is high quality. But what can happen is a lot more animation, especially if you're putting Dave Filoni in charge, right? You can go from one big animated show every year to maybe 2 or 3 even, right? Why not? This opens the door for a lot of stuff and a lot of content we, the fans, have been dying to see, but have been probably too expensive or niche to actually create. And I think Star Wars Maul, Shadow Lord, is basically their best bet to really get some momentum in the animated sector. I mean, first, let's not forget about Sam Witwer as well, the person who plays Maul in the animated series. His voice acting is freaking ridiculous. Like, for a character who in the movies had no lines, Sam Witwer could have went in any direction. They could have went with a standard low, gruff, monotone voice, but no, instead they go with this. Kenobi! The Maul arc is cool, but Sam Witwer really brings that character to the next level completely. That's one of the most unhinged and over-the-top and impactful voice acting roles I've ever seen. And this is why whenever Maul comes onto screen in those animated shows, people just watch. One does not talk like that if they have nothing interesting to say. And again, if you think Filoni's development of Ahsoka and Asajj was cool, wait till you see what happens in this show. So Filoni was responsible for taking Maul, resurrecting him on Dathomir, and then he and his brother kind of fool around the galaxy. They eventually start a criminal syndicate, and together they essentially take over the sovereign planet of Mandalore, where Maul becomes the leader of the Death Watch Mandalorians. So the cool factor here is, even though Maul is no longer a Darth and has essentially failed in his life's purpose, he is still a failed Sith Lord, Sith assassin, which basically makes him a god amongst normie criminal degenerate scum. He's basically the Scalabrini of Star Wars Force users. He will always be closer in power to Palpatine than you will be in power to him. And a certain part of the fan base, the guys who really liked watching Vader ragdoll Rebel troopers at the end of Rogue One, are going to love seeing Maul in action once again. And because this show takes place after Order 66, when we last see Maul and Ahsoka on that crashing Venator together, this means Maul has to reset completely. He has to start over, basically go into hiding for a little bit as the Empire rises, and then, he has to recreate this whole criminal syndicate. And because of the naming convention of the show, Star Wars Maul, Shadow Lords, that means this is a standalone series, not tied to Tales or the Clone Wars series, which promises depth and hopefully purpose. And the criminal syndicate he'll be working with and creating in this series, the Crimson Dawn, is something we've only really seen in Solo, and there are also some comics that follow Kiara after she takes over the group. But by the time we see the Crimson Dawn, it had become one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the entire galaxy. And unlike other organizations who have a variety of different rackets, the Crimson Dawn mainly focused on intelligence gathering. It'll be extremely interesting to see how this organization was first created, what its original purpose actually was, before Maul died. And it'll also be really cool to see the shadowy underworld of the early Empire. I mean, we've been promised this era for so long through canceled shows like Star Wars Underworld, canceled games like Star Wars Level 1313, and, Boba Fett was also supposed to do justice to that whole, demographic of Star Wars, and it kind of didn't. So now, hopefully, this show will finally do it justice. And guys, I know that Filoni and Sam, they're gonna put everything into this. They've already invested way too much into these characters, into these storylines. So this is gonna be the best kind of content I think they can create. And if Star Wars knocks the animated content out of the park and creates something truly phenomenal and loved, this will shift their business decisions in the future. And I think I've always thought that the animated side of Star Wars has been underutilized, especially now that we just have Dave Filoni. Might as well just lean into his strengths, right? I'm very excited for this new animated show, and I've heard from some early viewers who got a glimpse of it at Star Wars Celebration last year that the animation and visual style has further improved from the last season of the Clone Wars, which already looked amazing when you compare it from those earlier episodes of the Clone Wars. So that's what I guess we can kind of look forward to in 2026, other than the Mandalorian Grogu movie, of course, which will also be fun. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my life is like a box of chocolates. What?